Thank you so much, Maisha, and welcome everyone to our 12th and final Business of Dentistry webinars of our webinar series. And we have a real special treat for you tonight. As you can see on the screen is my dear friend, Rachel Wall, who is the founder and CEO of a company out of North Carolina called Inspired Hygiene. And I've been in dentistry for 37 years, and as far as I'm concerned, she is the premier authority on how to make your hygiene department run efficiently and profitably. So that is what we are going to talk about tonight, and she and I will be presenting. She will be doing most of the presenting. So Maisha, if you could go ahead and put up my slides, that would be appreciated. And while you're doing that, I'm going to thank the 6 executive directors of our dental societies that have been so wonderful and positive and supportive of the efforts that we've done here. That we'll start off thanking Leah Dishian from the San Gabriel Valley Dental Society, Greg Orloff of the Los Angeles Dental Society, Kurt Thornton from the San Fernando Valley Dental Society, Megan Francis from the Orange County Dental Society, which is where I'm located, Michelle Snyder from the West Los Angeles or Western Dental Society, and Kristen Avina from the Harbor Dental Society. So my name is Art Wiederman. I would think many of you know me. We've done this now for a year. I'm very proud of the work we've done with this webinar series. I am a dental division director at the CPA firm of Eide Bailly. We are all across the Western United States. I am located in Southern California in the city of Tustin. We work in our office in Tustin with about 300 dentists on accounting, tax, planning, metrics, you name it, we do it. And our firm, Eide Bailly, has offices, as I said, across the Western United States. And we work with about 1,000 dentists across our offices in the United States. So this is our contact information, which we'll put up at the end of the webinar also. If you guys have questions, please put them into the Q&A. So I will be the Q&A monitor for tonight. If you have any questions for Rachel about anything and everything that has to do with hygiene, working with hygienists, employing hygienists, anything that has to do with your hygiene department, you will not have a better resource than Rachel. So let's go ahead, Maisha, and move along my slides so I can get to Rachel. Just want to let you guys know, if you don't know, I do a podcast every other week called The Art of Dental Finance and Management. We just published our 136th episode. We're going to be doing lots of really cool stuff when the new tax laws come out. If Congress ever decides to pass anything, the president's Build Back Better plan is on the table, and it may happen this year and it may happen next year. We'll see. So we'll be on top of that for you. They're released Wednesdays bi-weekly. I had a wonderful interview with Dr. Anissa Holmes. You should listen to. There's a lot of really good stuff, just like what you're going to get tonight. Please sign up and subscribe to receive our future communications. And if you want information or find the podcast or sign up, you go to www.eidbailly.com/dental-cpa-podcast. Okay, next slide. So I want to kind of give the update again on the PPP and the ERC. I know we're all sick and tired of hearing of it, but it's still here and we still need to deal with it. So most of you have filed for your forgiveness for your PPP round 1 loan. For your PPP round 2 loan, you have up to 24 weeks after the time you got your loan. And most of you, for your second loan, you got it probably in January or February. And you have 24 weeks after that, and then 10 months after that to file for your forgiveness. So you do not have to file for forgiveness right away. You have till probably the spring of 2022 to do that. If you haven't filed for forgiveness for your PPP round 1, you really need to do that, or you're probably already going to be making payments on that. I will share one thing that is not on the slide that has come up. In the past 2 weeks, the state of California, in their infinite wisdom, has decided that if any of you received your second round PPP loan after March 31st. So any of you that got your PPP loan after March 31st, and we found a couple of them. The way this works is that when you go and file for your forgiveness, that forgiveness basically means that you don't have to pay the loan back. In federal tax law, if you are forgiven a debt, let's say that you went to the credit card company and you wanted them to forgive your credit card of $20,000, they will send you a 1099. That is income. Forgiveness of debt is income. Congress and the state of California have said, okay, no, it's not income when you get your loan forgiven, which is a big deal. But the state of California has said that when you receive your forgiveness of your loan, PPP round 2, if you received it after March 31st, the forgiveness will be taxable. So if you want to control when that is taxable, if you got it after March 31st, it's only for California purposes. If you want the forgiveness income to fall into 2022, push your forgiveness off to 2022. That's not on the slide, but that came up in the last week or two. Next slide, please, Maisha. So it is not too late to take advantage of the employee retention tax credit. We're pushing close to 100 dental practices that we have gotten. We're now pushing close to $3.25 million in employee retention tax credits. So even if you have already filed for forgiveness. So if you have filed for forgiveness, in many cases, you can still get a really nice credit. You have up to 2 years to amend your payroll returns. So if you have it, let's go to the next slide, please. So if you had a greater than 50% reduction in your gross revenues, net of patient refunds for the second quarter of 2019 versus the second quarter of 2020, which many of you did because most of you were shut down for 8 to 12 weeks starting in the middle of March, you will qualify for this credit. So we can do that. We've got 2 years to file the amended returns. We're still doing 2020 ERTCs. If you had a greater than 20% reduction in revenues, net of patient refunds, comparing either the fourth quarter of 2020 versus the fourth quarter of 2019, we get a look back, or the first, second, and third quarter of 2021 versus the first, second, and third quarter of 2019, greater than 20%, you have the ability to earn a credit of up to $7,000 for every employee that worked for you. If you have that 20% reduction, doctors, do not file for your PPP2 round forgiveness. Give us a call. We will work the numbers. We can slice and dice your wages to your best advantage. We are averaging $40,000 to $50,000 per doctor. We've gotten some in the high $100,000 to $200,000, depends on how big of a practice you have. So don't file for forgiveness if you have this reduction. You might have heard President Biden sign, this is not on the slide, President Biden signed the $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill on Monday, and included in that bill is a law that repealed the employee retention tax credit for the fourth quarter of 2021, except for certain startup businesses, which I'm not going to get into that tonight. So you're good for the first, second, and third quarter of 2021. If you had the 20% reduction, we just did one for a doctor, had 6 employees, and we got him a $42,000 credit for the first quarter of 2021. So if you want us to, we do a complimentary preliminary analysis. My email is awiederman@eidbailey.com. Next slide, please, Maisha. All right, so the next bunch of craziness that you're all going to have to deal with is called the HHS Provider Relief Fund. So the HHS Provider Relief Fund was created at the same time the PPP and the ERTC was, with the CARES Act on March 27th of 2020. Out of the $3.2 trillion that Congress put up for that act, $175 billion was set aside for the HHS Provider Relief Fund to compensate healthcare providers to fight and prevent COVID-19. So the dentists, so people started getting money on April 10th. Physicians and hospitals and critical care nursing units and nursing homes. Well, that's not anybody on this call tonight. They didn't really know what to do with the dentists until around August. So most of you got a check, a deposit into your bank account, July, August, September, of about 2% of your gross revenues from 2019 or 2018, depending on what tax return you had filed. So basically the way this works is, and before I go ahead, for the phase 3, many of you applied for that, and a lot of you probably might have gotten 6 figures. And the phase 3 payment was intended to compensate you for up to 88% of your lost revenues. That payment would have come into you sometime October, November, December of 2021 or 2020, or the first 1 or 2 or 3 months of 2021. The bottom line is this: if you received more than $10,000 from the HHS Provider Relief Fund during the period of July 1 to December 31, which most of you did, you must report a whole bunch of information between January 1 and March 31 of 2022 on the Department of Health and Human Services portal. Okay, and I'm going to be telling you about our webinar series for next year, and we're going to be here to help you with that too. You are not allowed to report until January 1, but I would recommend that you start gathering this information. I would go to hhs.gov, and they've got a whole bunch of information and a workbook that you can use. We've got workbooks that you can use also. We have created a portal that you can send questions to if you have any questions, which is prf@eidbailey.com. Very important, doctors. If you don't file with this portal by March 31, you will have to give back whatever money they gave you. Plain and simple. Next slide. So on September 29th, they opened the phase 4. If those of you filed for the phase 4, that filing is closed. And I left that slide up just to let you know that if you receive that money, this is taxable income, by the way, folks. You're going to have to pay income tax on it, and you're going to have to show that you use this money for one of 2 things: either for lost revenues or to prepare for and fight the coronavirus. So anyway, next slide. All right, this is the exciting part of this. We are going to be starting our 2022 Business of Dentistry series. And here's how this is going to go. On December 13th, we've been doing these series in the evening, and we've getting feedback, and we've got great feedback from all of you. We've gotten some wonderful, wonderful comments. Thank you for all your comments. But it's 6 to 8. You're all working late, working a full day, and then you got to come and listen to us talk, which is good stuff. So we're going to be doing these on Friday mornings from 9 to 11. And if you register for it and you can't make it, it will be on demand and available for you. So December, write these dates down. December the 13th is going to be our webinar that Mel Schwartz from Eid Bailey and I are going to be doing on year-end tax planning and new tax legislation. So if they pass the Build Back Better legislation, we'll tell you all about it by December 13th. If they don't, we'll let you know where they're at. Mel is our legislative liaison to IRS and Treasury, and every single day he's talking to congressmen, congresswomen about what's going on, talking to Treasury, what's going on. So we'll have the most up-to-date information for you. The next one is very important too. January 21st, we are going to help you navigate this HHS Provider Relief Fund portal step by step. We're going to put the portal up. We're going to go slide by slide, page by page. We're going to tell you exactly how to do it. And that's going to be Ashley Brandt Duda and Tyler Bernier are our 2 partners at Eid Bailey who have been spearheading our efforts on this. So that will be there. February 18th, I have Aliyah Ramshian, my good friend, who runs HR for Health, is going to talk about hiring new employees and federal labor law updates. March 18th, we're going to be doing some metrics with Curtis Marshall from Dental Intel and Dr. Jeanette Kern, my dear friend. We're going to be talking about how to grow your bottom line, looking at metrics. What percentage of your patients are being reappointed for hygiene? Rachel, we'll talk about that tonight, right?
Yes, we will.
Yes, we will. April 15th is adding sleep dentistry procedures to your practice. Dr. Emily Stopper is a practicing dentist in North Carolina, and she basically limits her practice to sleep dentistry. And as I've told many of you, I have sleep apnea. It was diagnosed by a dentist, and I am convinced it saved my life. So I am a big proponent of all of this. And then on May 20th, Practice Management Gems with Dr. Anissa Holmes. And when you have Dr. Anissa Holmes on a webinar, you just say, you have 2 hours, do whatever you want, because she's amazing. The registration page is coming soon. We don't have it up yet. Send me an email, awiederman@eidbailey.com. We'll send you the registration information. All the webinars will be from 9 to 11 a.m. Pacific time. I believe they're all Friday mornings. I have to check the December 13th date. And then registered dentists will be able to watch these webinars on demand. So, okay, with all of that, I think that's the end of my slides. So I would like to now introduce my dear friend, Rachel Wall. I've known Rachel, oh my gosh, we've known each other 20, 25 years. We're Peloton buddies, I found out.
We are.
We both ride Peloton and try and stay in shape, keep up with all you guys. I met Rachel through my Academy of Dental CPAs. She gave a talk. She is just an unbelievable wealth of knowledge. She is the president, CEO, founder of Inspired Hygiene out of North Carolina. And she is going to talk to you tonight about everything that you can do to improve your hygiene department. I have always been a proponent, Rachel, that the hygiene department is the life's blood of the dental practice. And I just don't think dentists give enough attention to the hygiene department. And there's just so much you can do. So I'm going to stay on with you. We will banter a bit. You will do most of the talking, which, as everyone knows, is very difficult for me to stay quiet. But I will do my best. So Rachel Wall of Inspired Hygiene, it's an honor and a privilege to have you on here. How are you tonight?
I'm doing great. Thank you. Thank you for having me. So I'm ready to share my screen. So I think Maisha, if you can take Art's slides down.
Take me down, Maisha.
It'll be easier. Share your screen and mine will knock off.
It will not let me do that. It's saying you can share your screen while the other participant is sharing. There we go. Okay, so now let's see what we can do.
So while we're doing this, I was at one of our biggest clients in near the Four Corners of New Mexico today. So if I get a little punchy, I've been on airplanes all day today. I will keep my eyes open, I promise, because I learn every time I hear Rachel. So take it away, Rachel.
Thank you. All right, let's see here. Okay, are you seeing my full screen here, slides?
Yes.
All right, good deal. Awesome. So we'll talk a little bit tonight about how you can get a strong return on the investment that you're making in hygiene and create that triple win investment. So Art, that's a pretty tall order to, promise we're going to let them know everything that they can do.
Well, not everything. We got to keep some secrets,
We do. And it's late here in North Carolina. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to stay up for,
I know it's past your bedtime. Yeah.
It is past my bedtime. No, I'm just kidding. We're going to certainly drop some gems here, and please feel free, drop questions in the chat as we're going. Art is going to monitor that. And I let him know that. Yeah, I let him know that as those questions come up, I'll try to give some natural breaks where we can kind of dig into those and answer those. So want to make sure that we address anything that we can for you guys tonight. And if I can't answer your question, I'm certain that either Art or I have a resource, and we can get back to you or give you that resource this evening. So
or we'll just make it up, one or the other.
Or just make it up. Yeah,
that's
either
right.
way. Either way, right? Between the two of us, we probably have it figured out. So this is a book that I wrote a couple years ago, and actually have a promo code for you guys to grab this at the end of the program tonight. But you've all heard of return on investment. I mean, you're smart business savvy people. And if you're on this webinar, I know you're also working with some smart dental CPAs and financial advisors. So anytime we make an investment, right, we want to get a strong return. And no matter what your role is in the dental practice, you make an investment in hygiene. Even dental assistants make an investment in the hygiene department when they, look at their patient's recare schedule and they remind the patient, hey, it looks like it's been a while since you've seen our hygienist. Let's go ahead and find a time for you to get an appointment to see them for your preventive visit. So no matter the role on the team, everybody in the practice makes an investment in the hygiene department. And we believe that investment should create a very strong return, a triple win for the patients, right? First and foremost, it should create a return for the provider, the hygienist that's actually delivering the care, and also a return for the practice, for your business. And so we're going to touch on some of the metrics that you want to make sure that you're looking at to maximize the hygiene department. And I'll give you some tips in each of those areas to see what you can do to really elevate that piece. And there are going to be a lot of things that you can look at with your team. And then certainly if there's ever anything that you feel like we can help you with or look into deeper into your practice within the hygiene department, we are always happy to do that. So let's dig into this a little bit. Art, you asked me as we were preparing for this to share a little bit about, what are things, what should we be looking at in the hygiene department, post pandemic?
Right.
And this is a photo of one of our dear favorite clients, located in Atlanta that we've worked with over the years. And I just loved this post, and we saw so many of these. Isn't that cool? We saw so many of these during that time that dentistry was, pretty much shut down other than emergency visits. And it seems like so long ago that happened, and it still seems so surreal that there was such a long period of time where so many of us were at home. So many of our dental teams were really uncertain as to, do our patients want to come back? Is our team going to want to come back? Like, what is this going to look like when we actually have the opportunity to reopen? So, what we saw immediately after that reopening was just a crushing demand for care. And I'll speak from experience based on what I've seen here in my community, but also in our community of inspired hygiene clients, which includes California and about 40 other states. So, across the board, most of our clients saw a very strong surge of patients back into their practice upon opening. We didn't know how that was going to turn out, but that was a good thing. We saw some ebbs and flows of COVID within the staff, and needing to shut down again. In fact, we had a client just a couple weeks ago that had to shut down their office again for a week because of multiple COVID exposures and staff members who had COVID. So we're still facing some of that, and some of you have probably experienced that as well. Right after opening back up, we saw the supply chain disruption with the PPP and some of the filtration devices and things like that. And then the other thing that we saw that we can't ignore, and history, if we don't learn from it, sometimes history repeats itself. So not to belabor it, but to learn from the lesson of, we saw some major tensions between dentists and hygienists. And so what we found to be true is really the practices that came out of this the strongest. It really all came down to communication. And, just like you, Art, those of us that work kind of behind the scenes with consulting and advising and being, those that are kind of trying to collect this information and advising our clients, like we were working just as hard as ever to really try to learn and to really advise our clients in a, in a situation that we've never experienced before. Like, the word of the day was, hey, this is my first pandemic. So
there's no playbook for this.
Yeah, there's no playbook for this. But what we saw over and over and over was that teams that were sticking together, that had a positive outlook on things, that were ready to go back once they reopened. The overwhelming common thread was communication.
Yeah,
And
and the other thing, Rachel, is that everybody had 8 to 12 weeks. What dentist in America ever gets 8 to 12 weeks where their office is closed and they can get their team together and say, you know what, folks, we've got a once in a lifetime opportunity
yeah.
to maybe change some things in our practice for the better. And did you see some of that going on with your clients, Rachel?
We did. And in fact, we immediately sent out a resource on, hey, here's what you can do. When we thought it was going to be 3 weeks, here's what you can do during this time, because there's so many things in a dental practice that just get, pushed aside because we're busy. It's not like working, maybe in a corporate office where you have some downtime and you can take care of some things, or you have the opportunity to have multiple meetings to address an issue. You're moving at the speed of your schedule every day. And so some of our clients took the opportunity to take some time off, right, that they hadn't done in a very long time. And that worked out fine, as long, again, as they communicated some before, during, and after that time. Where we saw things really fall apart, and not in every situation, but again, a common thread was, yeah, I haven't heard from my dentist since, the day that we closed. No word on when are we reopening, how are we reopening, what is the dentist doing to provide a safe environment? Because at this point, we just had no idea, what this was going to look like when we started seeing patients again. So, this is something that I would just encourage you all to take as a life lesson, right? As your practice continues along, is to just stay in communication with your team. And what we advised them to do was just communicate more than you think you need to. And honestly, that is just I think just a pearl of practice management, is just communicate more than you think you need to, right? If there's something that's changing within the practice, just make sure that everybody is aware, everybody has been communicated to, and everybody understands whatever initiative it is that you're trying to move forward. So that really was the strength of, those practices as they were reopening. So as they moved through, months after reopening, what we saw still was just kind of some burnout from those long hours. A lot of practices were working extended hours to make up for some of the time that they were closed. So then we found ourselves again 6 months later advising, like, let some folks take vacation, right? Everybody needs a little bit of a break from this. The other thing that we saw once we, pulled out of those first couple of months of the reopening was a lot of practices who had pretty solid systems in place. A lot of that had fallen away because they had taken off all their scheduling blocks. They had maybe they had extended appointment times. Some teams were working assisted hygiene, just trying to get patients back in. And a lot of the systems that they had in place had just kind of gone out the window, particularly diagnostic systems, and really spending the time having conversations with the patients about the treatment that was needed, and spending time educating, because they were just trying to triage and manage this huge influx of patients that were coming in at the time. Sorry, having a little nose.
That's okay. That's okay. And Rachel, one of the things I saw too that I heard from my doctors is when patients came back in, May, June, when the dental offices opened up, the hygienists also were listening to everybody's COVID story.
Yes.
Oh my God. It's just like, oh, well, my mom got sick of COVID, and my aunt passed away. I mean,
Yeah.
and the compassion that the hygienists out there had to be showing had to be like over the top, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I know. And I mean, really, that we all had to be showing for each other. And, I mean, that continues even into 2021. So the other things that we saw were just a continued staffing crisis, demand for increased wages, especially with hygiene. And we're still seeing that now. I will say that, I listened to a podcast today by Kevin Henry with Ignite DA, and he was talking about some information that he had gained from the Dental Trade Alliance and also through our friends at Dental Post, and said that they're seeing increased numbers of applicants posting on Dental Post. So that's encouraging. So we're hoping that that is going to start subsiding, and we're going to see more influx of talent into the job pool for dentistry. So that's encouraging. We also saw delays in repairs and things like that. I have a neighbor down the street. It's getting kind of chilly here in North Carolina this weekend, and their heat is out. And she said it's going to be after Thanksgiving before they can have it fixed. So, dental practices that are having some mechanical issues and things like that, some of them are seeing delays with that. And again, like I said, more COVID closures. So now we're in the state though, we're over a year out. What we're seeing now that's really encouraging is that practices are rebuilding and they are refocusing, and they're refocusing on their systems. This is a client of ours in the Chicago area, and they're just a great example of they had to rebuild a good portion of their team, post-COVID. And so they have, half of their hygiene team is brand new. They have a lot of new dental assistants. They had to get really creative to find team members, and they had to really step up what they were offering to really get some solid candidates. And now they've got a really good solid team, and they're retraining and refocusing and getting their systems back in place. So, they're still seeing a strong demand for patient care. Patients are accepting treatment, right? When we're presenting it effectively, patients are accepting that treatment and moving forward with it. So that is really great. And so now is a great time to refocus on the hygiene department.
Okay.
Yeah. So let's look at a couple metrics here that are kind of tried and true metrics or KPIs in the hygiene department. This certainly is not an exhaustive list, but these are some that we'll focus on tonight and some that are really important for y'all to be looking at in your practice. And we'll share a couple extras that pertain to some of these, or kind of some sub metrics in some of these areas here. So the first one, is open time. And this has been a common metric in place for years and years, that hygiene should not have any more than 10% open time in the past, right? So if we're looking a month past, right? If at the end of November, we look back at the month and say, how much open time did we have? We really want to see that at 10% or less. I will say that our world has changed a lot since this metric was established many years ago. I think when this really came to being and we started to see the introduction of dental practice management from people like Linda Miles, right, back in the 80s and 90s, we didn't all have cell phones, and we weren't having virtual meetings, where somebody texts and says, hey, can you jump on a Zoom in 10 minutes? We need to talk about this issue. So our patients' lives have changed. I remember when I started as a hygienist in 1991, 30 years ago, which is crazy. The patients went to work and they left at 2:00 to go to their dental appointment, and then they went back to work, right? There weren't people texting them and calling them, all the time. So there's some of these metrics that I believe are being challenged pre-COVID and certainly post-COVID, and we can talk about that a little bit too. The next one is Perio Awareness. And so what we really strive for is a 35% Perio Awareness. And this is a formula that really involves comparing the number of adult prophies to the number of quadrants of scaling, root planning, and perio maintenance. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in detail. 60% of restorative we would expect and hope would be coming out of hygiene. Now, this is a team effort, right, between the dentist and the hygienist, but that is really where a lot of that treatment is being identified, because these patients are coming into hygiene on a regular basis, and we're doing a very thorough exam, both the dentist and the hygienist, and really collaborating on that to really drive treatment to the doctor's chair. So I'll give you some tips on, doctors, how you can really support hygiene and doing more of that. And then last but not least, this profitability point, the 3-to-1. And so we'll talk about that kind of towards the end, and we'll talk about how I believe that is really being challenged right now and what we need to be looking out for in regards to hygiene profitability. All right, so there are also intangibles, right? This is another one of our amazing dental hygiene client teams. Those intangibles that your hygiene team brings to your table are just invaluable. You know, those relationships that they build and that they maintain over the years, even when, you know, as the dentists are coming in and spending a few minutes with those patients that maybe their treatment is complete, right? Maybe they're very stable, but they continue that relationship with your practice through the hygiene department. So, you know, the hygiene department really can be the backbone of the practice when those metrics are met and when these intangibles are in place, right? They're also a center of education, right? They're educating patients on the oral systemic link, on the value of dentistry, and on the services that you provide. Hygienists also can be a great screener for sleep issues. You mentioned that, Art, and I noticed that Dr. Stopper is going to be sharing about that later on into next year. So, you know, the hygienists can really be the front line on so many of these life-saving tools, screening tools, that it's really critical to have this be a strong, healthy part of your team and have those hygienists recognize their role as part of the healthcare team and really own that and be excited about that. They can be a patient advocate for sure. And, you know, the other thing too is a lot of referrals can come through their hygiene department, right, through those relationships. And it's a great place to ask for those referrals when, you know, the patients give compliments. So,
I remember, Rachel, when I was with Pride, we would talk about three things, and this is years ago, is a hygiene department has many functions, but it's a source of revenue for your practice. It's a source of new work, like you were saying, 60% of restoratives come out of there. And it's an opportunity to ask a patient for referral and get new patients. I mean, these are all these things. And I just, a lot of my doctors, they're all focused on, well, we want to place implants, so we're going to do that. And I said, well, how's your hygiene? Oh, it's there, you know.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. So one thing to think about that I talk with doctors sometimes is, you know, they are so focused, and we're so fortunate now that we have so much technology and so much that we can offer to our patients is, you know, they get excited about these procedures and they want to have their head down, you know, all day in those procedures. And sometimes they feel like hygiene exams are an interruption. And what I say is, what if you could turn them into an opportunity, right? Because if this is what you love to do, what if your hygiene department was feeding more of those cases to your schedule? And that is absolutely possible. And it takes some effort, right? It takes some effort. It takes everybody being open-minded and communicating. And it also takes the dentist really empowering the hygienists and educating them on, you know, how do we tee these things up? What do we look for, and how do we bring these conversations up? And we'll talk a little bit about that as we move along. But yeah, let's look at it more as an opportunity rather than an interruption. And then I was just talking with a potential client last night. This is my second late night East Coast, Pacific Coast meeting this week. But we were talking to a client last night that's in Fresno. And I said, you know, these doctors are doing some amazing procedures. And I said, you know, a lot of times doctors like you guys are motivated by that and you love adding these services to your practice. And a lot of focus in the practice goes towards that. And very often what happens is hygiene gets left behind. It's not intentional, but, you know, we can only put our focus into so many areas at one time, right? So a lot of times once those doctor services are running, they'll look around and they'll notice, hey, like we're here, but our hygiene's still practicing where they were 10, 15, 20 years ago. So, you know, that's where we can really help, you know, elevate that hygiene department and bring everybody up to the same level or similar level. So what you don't want is this to happen. And this is real life data from a client that we spoke with. Yeah.
I'm going to cry, Rachel.
Yeah, I know. You want to cry?
I'm going to cry.
I know. And I will say we don't see zero perio percentage that often, but even in today, we still see 2%, 6% perio. I would say within the last week, I've seen 6% perio probably 3 times. And these are practices that are reaching out for help. So, and they're not intentionally neglecting patients. A lot of these patients are, getting scaling and root planning disguised as a prophy. And that happens so much. So, I spoke with this doctor in 2018, and this is where the practice was. And then he called back in 2020, and we have them submit some data, to see where they are. And, I see this and I think to myself, okay, how am I going to tell them that they're not doing any better than they were before? Well, the good news is I didn't have to, right? He knew. He's like, hey, we've actually gone backwards and we need some help. It's time. And so what happens is he wasted 2 years, right, of
Right.
patients getting healthier and of additional revenue that could have been coming from the practice. 2 years.
And liability too. I mean,
Absolutely.
I mean, so what's the term? Supervised neglect.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, yeah. And I run into that a lot when I talk to my doctors. It's like, well, my hygienist just does not believe in this. And well, do you probe? Well, not as much as I should. What does that mean? I mean, the whole thing. But this is, I mean,
I know.
well, that's why you're here.
That's right. That's right. So don't let this happen, right? If you see that you're here, get some help, get an effort within your team, whatever it takes, to really turn this around. So let's talk about the schedule, because honestly, the schedule can be a big obstacle, the hygiene schedule. Like, everybody may have intention to do the right thing, but if the schedule is holding you back, you've got to clear that obstacle. And we typically see hygiene schedules in one of two ways. One is it shows up like the ghost town, right? This is where there's a lot of open time in the schedule. I joke and say there's tumbleweeds rolling through the halls, and everybody's kind of looking at each other like, why can we not keep our hygiene schedule full? And I will say that we're hearing less of this right now. We're hearing more of what we call Grand Central, where we cannot get these patients in fast enough. We just don't have enough time in our schedule to do that. And I think that has been accelerated by, the increased demand, things that happened with patients while they were out, because some of these patients didn't just stay out for those 2 or 3 months that we were closed. Some of them are just now coming back to the dentist. And so, they have a greater demand for care. And some teams are short staffed. They have not been able to fully, rebuild out their hygiene schedule. So this is what we're seeing more often now. And so it's really important, even if we are in this Grand Central, that we are making sure our schedule is working for us instead of the schedule running us to death. So this is what we see, but there are still some practices that are seeing a lot of open time in their schedule. And what we're hearing now, Art, is that where, when patients were first coming back, or over, I'd say the last 12 months or so, there was such a demand that, honestly, if the patient canceled their appointment, they may not get in for 3 or 4 more months. Yes. And that's a huge motivator. So that should be a lesson to us as we come out of this kind of, crush for appointments, is when we create scarcity around these appointments and we create value around them, the patients are much more likely to keep those appointments.
Yeah, like so, if they cancel, then you may not be able to get in for 3 months, like you say.
Exactly. So Rachel has a waiting list, maybe 3 months before you can get back on the schedule. Is there any way that you can keep this appointment? Right. She's really looking forward to see you, and we have this time reserved for you. So make sure you have your schedule prepared. I'm going to show you a block schedule example in just a moment. But thinking about open time, we still have to be considerate of this. And so I would recommend that everybody really track their open time. And that open time is, the available hours that hygiene was there to see patients compared to the amount of time that was open, right, where they could see patients. So do the math and create that, find out what that perio percentage, or I'm sorry, what that open time percentage is for you. If it's over 20%, then you either have a major last minute cancellation and no-show problem, or more likely it's a capacity problem where you have more hygiene hours than you have demand for care. That is not common right now, but just tuck that in your hat because you may see that evolve again over the next year or two, as we go back to a little bit more of a normal situation. But you talked about Hygiene Repoint, right? And that is something that our friends at Dental Intel are so great at helping us track. And regardless of the dental analytics system you're using, whether it's that or Dentametrics or Practice by Numbers, whatever it might be, like make sure that you're paying attention to that Hygiene Repoint percentage. It should be 90% at least, okay? And here's what happens when we don't pay attention to that. So let's say that we are starting with 2,000 patients of record, or 2,000 patients rather, that are in recare. Okay, that are in recare. So we think, well, what if we reappoint 70% of those patients? I mean, 70% seems like a decent number to reappoint, but watch what happens in 6 months. So if we reappoint 70% of those patients,
1,400.
and none of them call back, right? Some are going to call back, but what if none of them called back? Now we're down to 1,400 patients. Now, what if out of those 1,400, we reappoint 70% of those patients? Now we're down to 980 in another 6 months. So over the course of a year, we have cut our recare pool in half. So we get questions sometimes from practice owners that say, why are we not adding hygiene days? We're seeing a lot of new patients. So why are we not adding hygiene days? And then the other thing is, man, we used to be busy. We used to keep 3 hygienists busy and now we're not. So look at 2 things. Hygiene reappoint. So when the patient is in the chair, what percentage of those patients are reappointing that day for a future hygiene appointment? And the other one is new patient reappoints.
So Rachel, let me ask, because I've got 100 questions, right? Okay, number one, do you like the hygienist making the next appointment, or do you want the front desk?
No, I think that it is much more effective if the hygienists make that next appointment. They know what was discussed. They know, they have a relationship with the patient. They know what the patient's life is like, and they can say, hey, it seems like 10 o'clock works well for you. Let's go ahead and find a time for you in May, right? Where we can, find another convenient time for you that works. Let's go ahead and get this on the schedule. So they have so much power to do that. Now, if we get behind or we get in the weeds one day, I certainly have had times where I'm like, can you please reappoint this patient for hygiene? And the business team will do that. So sometimes that does happen, but I think it works best and it's most effective when the hygienists are primarily responsible for that. And one thing that I've seen happen is the team isn't clear on whose responsibility it is. And so the hygienist may think that the business team is reappointing, and the business team may think the hygiene team is reappointing, and the patient's not getting reappointed.
And that's the doctor as the leader's job to say, this is how this works.
Yep. Doctor and practice manager. Yeah, absolutely. So take a look at that. Make sure you're tracking that hygiene reappoint and new patient reappoint, because that's really going to make a big difference.
The folks at Dental Intel told me that the average of all of their patients, I think they work with like 14,000 dentists across the country, is about 55%. Is that what they kind of told you?
Well, here you go. You got my slide.
We didn't rehearse. We did not rehearse. Right?
So this was from some data they had in 2020, and actually this was from 2020, and so you can see right here, hygiene reappoint. The average is about 80%. The top 10% is 90%, and the bottom 10% is 57%. So this is a really, really, really important number. And this is really there's so many things that go into, why aren't we adding hygiene days, is we've got to be reappointing, and we've got to be looking at this number here, right? New patient reappoint. Look at that. The top was 64%. I mean, everybody wants to have all of their new patients reappoint. I think 60% is a reasonable goal.
Yeah, I mean, the idea is you're supposed to wow them when they come into the office, and get the next hygiene appointment. Maybe there's an operative or a restorative appointment coming up. But yeah, too many of them walk out the door because the people at the front desk are too busy.
Yeah. And the other thing too is a lot of practices will say, gosh, like what's wrong with our new patient experience if we're not reappointing more? That certainly is part of it. But the other piece of it to look at is what are the patients that you're attracting, right? So if you're attracting a lot of new patients with a low cost offer on a coupon or something, then you may be setting yourself up for a lower new patient reappoint because you're getting a lot of shoppers. You're getting patients that go from one dental practice to the other to get their hygiene visit, right? They don't ever get settled in a practice home. So, there's a lot of things to consider here. It's not just that your new patient experience is broken. Always worth looking at that. But really, really take a look at that. The other thing I would say look at is a patient growth percentage, right? So this is where we're really seeing, is there growth in our patient base, or are we losing patients? Do we have a negative net patient growth? Because here's the thing is you can get in a lot of new patients, but if more patients are falling out of recare than are coming in, then you're going to have a negative patient growth and you're not going to be adding days to hygiene.
And a lot of that is the hygienist and the team educating the patient about how important it is to come in every 3, 4, or 6 months, whatever is decided. And if you don't create the urgency and a reason, they won't reappoint. If it doesn't hurt, I don't need to come in, right?
Yeah. And also, that's right. And also staying in touch with our existing patients, right? So paying that close attention to those existing patients and keeping them in the loop. Okay, now, years ago, I had a client tell me, they said, hey, our marketing company said we need to have 30% open time. And I thought, well, that's crazy. We teach 10% or less open time. 30, why would they say 30% open time? And then they said, well, actually what they're talking about is that 30% of our hygiene schedule should be open going forward. And I thought about that. I thought, what, that actually makes a lot of sense. And I agree with that is, so if we're looking in the past, right, we want to have as low open time. If we're looking in the future, we do want to have some open time as reserved blocks for priority care. Because if we don't have that, then very often hygiene gets stuck in a prophy trap because they don't have anywhere to put other types of services. So this is an example of a sample hygiene scheduling template, right? Most of you have seen something like this before. It's not rocket science, but it is important to reserve time on that schedule for, your new patient goals. If your goal is, if most of your patients come through hygiene, new patients, and your goal is to see 25 new patients a month, but there's only 10 appointments available a month or, a month out, you're not going to hit that goal. So you've got to hold that time and then really strategically schedule into that time. And again, make sure the entire team knows how to utilize those blocks, right? We also want to schedule for SRP. So, it's hard. Something happens in the hygiene mind when there's nowhere to put a patient in for periotherapy for 6 or 8 weeks. Then often the hygienist will just think, well, you know what, I can't, even if I diagnose this and plan and present this treatment, there's nowhere to put this patient. So I'm just going to do the best I can today and we'll check it again next time. And then that becomes a cycle that we never get out of. Okay. So making sure we're reserving time ahead for our scaling route planning, right? Perio maintenance. If your schedule is really tight, have patients book 2 perio maintenance appointments ahead and block time on the schedule for perio maintenance as well. This is going to help you hit those production goals so that you really know that you're getting that consistency and you're not having highs and lows, and it's not all just prophy based, that you're really you're diagnosing into these blocks, and the blocks create space for this treatment to actually occur. So your schedule will run you, right, unless you run your schedule. And the same is true, for the doctor's schedule as well. So before we move on from scheduling and the open time conversation, any questions about scheduling or anything in that realm before we move on?
I don't have any questions in Q&A, but I do have a question.
Okay.
So this office that I was in, they were talking about they're going to add a couple more days of hygiene, but they're concerned about that it might cut into the doctor's production, because if I add more hygiene, that's more hygiene checks.
Yes.
So how do you manage hygiene checks when you're trying to grow your hygiene department versus the doctor not getting weighed down and doing hygiene checks?
Yeah. Okay. So a few things is you can coordinate some of these blocks, right, that we're seeing here, like these Perio blocks. You can coordinate some of that with blocks that are on the doctor's schedule for higher production procedures, longer appointments. So you could have a perio block and then maybe a perio maintenance block, because perhaps those perio maintenance patients that come in 4 times a year, maybe they don't need a doctor exam every time, right? And it's never going to be perfect, right? Because it's when a patient calls to schedule, if you have a perio maintenance block, we're not always going to be able to put the exact right, interval of the exam there, but trying to coordinate that helps. The other thing that, particularly in California, where, hygienists can give anesthesia, sometimes the hygienist can do a brief handoff for the doctor and then go give anesthesia for the doctor's patient while the doctor's doing the exam. So how can we work together as a team to really make that effective? And I will say the other thing too is the more the hygienist can prepare that patient and have everything ready when that doctor comes in, the more effective and efficient that doctor exam is going to be. So if that doctor comes in, and we'll talk about this in just a moment, we'll get into this deeper. If that doctor has to come in and start a diagnostic conversation from scratch every time, a lot less treatment is going to be recommended, because they're going to be tired, right? They just came out of this intense procedure, and then they've got to come in and have this conversation from scratch. So A, they're going to get tired and they're not going to recommend as much treatment. B, the doctor's going to be less likely to come into the hygiene appointment in a timely manner, because they know, hey, I'm going to be in there for a while because I'm going to have to start this conversation from scratch. So I better finish this procedure. And then C is, the more prepared the patient is to hear the diagnosis, photos are ready on the patient monitor when doctor comes in, the more likely they are to accept treatment and the less time it's going to take for the doctor. So I agree with you. And there is a point at which there are too many hygiene checks, right, for a doctor to be able to manage a busy schedule, particularly if they're doing more than 2 columns of dentistry. But there are ways to streamline that and really have the hygienist do the bulk of the preparing for that.
Okay. We did get a question while you brought this up. It's a good question. So one of our participants tonight is saying, how do you feel about the hygienist alternating schedules? In other words, one works from 8 to 5 and the other one working from 8:30 to 5:30.
Yeah, I think that's great, because and then all of the exams are not happening at the same time, right? So I think that's smart. I think that's a great idea. The only challenge that creates is the huddle, right? So if you're having a huddle, how do we get everybody there together? But perhaps what you could do is have both hygienists working from 8 to 5:30, and maybe the hygienist B has some of his or her admin time from 8 to 8:30, and then they start seeing a patient at 8:30, and hygienist A sees a patient at 8 and has their admin time from 5 to 5:30 or something like that.
Right. Okay, that was a good question.
So that they can all be there for the huddle at the same time. So yeah, that can be a great strategy. Okay. All right. So now let's move into this other metric we talked about, which was the perio piece, right? And our goal being 35% of perio, of hygiene treatment procedures being perio related. This is from the Academy of Periodontology. The CDC says the same things, that approximately half of Americans suffer from some level of gum disease, right? And so we've got to really be aware of this. And what we know now is that there is a large body of evidence that supports the oral systemic link, a large body of evidence. And we know that this active inflammation increases our patient's risk for heart attack, stroke, type 2 diabetes, certain types of cancer, complications from COVID, right? I mean, the list goes on, and it's chronic inflammation. So, if our perio percentage in our practice is 6%, and half of Americans have some level of disease, how do we close that gap? And you may not get to 50% perio percentage, and that's okay, right? But if you get from 6% to 25%, that's a huge improvement.
Yes.
Huge improvement. So the first piece is really defining what is periodontal health. So I'm going to go forward, and then I'm going to go backward here. So in 2017, the AAP and the EFP, which is the European Federation of Perio, got together for this workshop, and they just created all of these papers, and from it also came a new classification system for periodontal disease called staging and grading. Here is the URL for that. So everybody just kind of take a picture of that with your phone if you don't already have access to this. But one of the papers that came out of that I thought that was really interesting was not just about how do we diagnose periodontal disease, how do we treat it, how do we classify it, but it was, what is periodontal health? Like, this is part of the reason why there's such a discrepancy between dental providers with the perio piece is because we don't all agree what is health and what is disease. But if we're believing that the AAP is our authority on this is what they're saying, is that the absence of inflammation associated with gingivitis or periodontitis assessed clinically, that is a prerequisite for defining periodontal health. So in other words, we cannot say that a person is periodontally healthy if they have inflammation associated with gingivitis or periodontitis. And the primary indicator of active inflammation is bleeding. So if our patient's gums are bleeding, it doesn't matter if it's a lot or a little, or if it's one area, or if it's 3 areas, then we cannot define that as periodontal health. Now, if a patient has active inflammation, they have bleeding in one area behind a second molar, and everything else looks beautiful and pristine, that, it doesn't mean that every patient that has some level of inflammation needs to go through 4 quadrants of scale and root planing. There is a spectrum, right, of care. And we can create something that really makes sense and is practical. But it is very important for us to understand, like, what is health and what is not. So this came from these proceedings. This is one of the papers that's on this website. The other piece of that, so hold that thought on health versus disease. And then the other piece that came out was the staging and grading guide. So, we used to have the type 1, type 2. Now we have stage 1 through 4, right? So we know from the language of staging in diseases like cancer is if it's stage 4, we know that that's very serious. So part of the reasoning behind them using this language is because it is something that consumers are familiar with. And so this staging really reflects the destruction that has happened to this point with periodontal disease. So how much bone and attachment have they lost, right? The next piece of this is grading. And grading, the purpose of this is really to indicate the rate of expected progression of periodontal disease and how responsive we expect this patient will be to typical therapy, right? And what is the impact that this could have on their systemic health? So this really looks at how, now that we've diagnosed and we've identified that they have active disease, they've had destruction, how likely is it that this is going to progress slowly, at a moderate rate, or a very rapid rate? And so they give us some guidelines on this. I won't go into a lot of detail on that. But I would say that in speaking across the country, I would say now I'm seeing with the raise of hands that, probably 60 to 70% of attendees have at least heard of staging and grading, and maybe 20 to 30% are actually utilizing this in their practice. And what you would do is this is your diagnostic language now, right? So it's super critical to always have the diagnosis documented in your clinical notes. If you're rendering any type of treatment, we have to make sure that it's documented what the reason is for that treatment. So if it says active periodontal disease, then you would say stage 2, generalized, grade C. Okay, so that's how you would document that in your clinical notes. And I will tell you that this can get very complicated, or it can be made very simple. And we always want to err on the side of simple and practical. So I even heard a very well-known periodontist speaker recently. He said, are we really going to calculate the percentage of bone loss divided by their age? Are we going to get out our calculator and do that? Probably not, right? Over on the staging, it talks about where is the bone loss? Is it in the coronal third? Is it in the middle third? We're going to be eyeballing that on the x-rays, right? So we're not necessarily going to have, a very definite percentage of that. So don't make this too difficult for yourself. There's no staging and grading police. There is a diagnosis police, right? I mean, if your charts ever get audited by an insurance company or a dental board and we're missing some of that diagnostic data, that's a problem. But, if you grade this patient as a B and they're really a C, we can always make adjustments on that if we see changes. So I would just say, don't overthink it. It's a great system for classifying, but don't make it any harder, right, than it has to be. And this is just kind of a simplified version of this. There's no mention on the staging and grading sheet of bleeding per se, because we're only staging and grading patients that have active disease. And if they have active disease, that means that they have bleeding, okay? So bleeding is present across the board, right? We are seeing bone loss. Bone loss is our sign of periodontal disease. That is the different, or bone loss with bleeding, right? With active inflammation. That is our sign and one of our indicators of the difference between gingivitis and periodontitis. And then what are our pocket depths? What are we expecting this clinical attachment loss to be? And so then the question that I ask Art of all of our clients and whenever I'm speaking is, so if this is how the AAP defines disease, that stage 1 periodontal disease is bleeding, there is bone loss, there is attachment loss, and there are typically 4 millimeter pocket depths, then the question is, what percentage of our patients fall into that category? And so the hygienist can very easily answer this. And we ask them to answer that question based on new patients and also existing patients. And it gets a little bit tricky. With new patients, we don't have any baggage with them, right? They come in and we say, oh my gosh, 50% of our new patients have some level of disease. And then we say, okay, well, what about the patients that are in your chair on a regular basis that have active disease, that are in a prophy or perio maintenance? And what are we doing about that? How are we treating that?
Yeah, and Rachel, you talk about the fact, and I talked to one of the senior people at Henry Schein a couple of years ago, and they seem to think that the national average among their patients is 9%, using the 4,000 codes. So, and if I'm jumping ahead in your lecture, please, you can say we'll cover it later. But what if I have a practice that's like the one you showed me earlier, where I have, that wasn't even 1%. They're just not doing it. How do you wake up one day and say, oh, I just listened to Rachel, I get it, we haven't been doing this, now we need to do it. And for 20 years, I've been talking to the same patient, and suddenly now we need 4 quadrants of root planing. It's going to be $1,000. What are you doing? How do we deal with that?
Yeah, good question. That's a hot question. We get that a lot. So a couple things so that practice I showed you, I just remembered that was a prosthodontist practice. So they'd been very focused on that, but they had 2 hygienists in the practice, right? So they're doing hygiene, but not taking responsibility yet, or didn't until the moment that they said, okay, yeah, we have to do something about this for their role in helping their patients control that active inflammation. So if you're going to provide that service of hygiene, then we should provide the full scope of that service, right? Otherwise, let's refer, to a general dentist or a periodontist for that. So to answer the next question is, how do we start that? Is the thing that we find is that practices that we encounter, they're not intentionally neglecting that, although it would be seen as neglect or as a misdiagnosis or failure to diagnose, but it's not intentional. And so often what happens is when the hygienists have been seeing this bleeding, because it doesn't just appear. Now, if something changes in that patient's health, like they now have diabetes and they didn't have that before, certainly things can change. And certainly I could go to the doctor, I went a year ago and everything was fine, and I could go in January and all of a sudden I have high blood pressure. It's not the doctor's fault.
Right.
But we take that on like it's our fault, and we feel like guilty that we haven't told them this before, maybe because we know we've been managing disease and we haven't been telling the patient what's truly going on. But what we say is look back at the clinical notes, because very often, if they're even remotely thorough notes, there will be a reference to the patient's bleeding. We've talked about flossing. We recommend a Sonicare. We shortened their prophy interval, right? They're coming in more frequently. We told them that if this doesn't get better, that they will need to do some other kind of treatment. Like most of the time, the hygienist has said something to them. So we want to build on those past conversations. And then we want to say, hey, we now know that this type of inflammation contributes to a lot of other health conditions like heart attack, stroke, and type 2 diabetes. And you already have high blood pressure and high cholesterol, and you're telling me how stressful your job is. Like, you have these other risk factors, and this is just compounding. And we've tried these other approaches, but we haven't gotten the result that we're looking for because your body's not healing properly. So it's time to do something different. Right? It's time to take a different approach to really try to eliminate the cause of this active inflammation and help you heal. So that's really how we approach that, and it works very, very well.
Okay.
So to your point of 9% is this is a way that you can find out where you stand as a practice in this Perio percentage range. And Henry Schein calculates their Perio percentage a little bit different than we do. Dental Intel does theirs a little bit different than we do, but they all end up being within a few points of each other. So it's just, sometimes it's the percentage of revenue that's in the 4,000 codes, where we look at a comparison of these particular procedure counts here. So everybody just get your phone and pull up your camera, particularly if you have an iPhone. I think you may need to have an app if you have an Android. I don't know, because I don't have an Android, but you can just pick up your phone, turn on your camera, and just point it at this QR code. And then there'll be a little thing that comes up at the top that'll take you straight to the website where you can grab that later. Or you can take a picture of the slide, whatever you prefer. But you're welcome to grab this Perio percentage calculator tool and kind of figure out where you stand in that area.
Yeah, and I think many doctors will be shocked when they see these numbers because they probably never looked at them before.
Yeah. And you look at it, you think that can't be right, but I just pulled it from my practice management software, right? So it's good. It's good if you do this for a 6-month or a 12-month period. You want to give yourself a little bit of time, a period of time that you're looking at these numbers. So, this is what we've been really kind of doing a lot of lately, is helping teams refocus. One of the things that's really important is to just first acknowledge what everybody's been through, over the last 18 months. Acknowledge your team, acknowledge your doctors. If you're listening and you're a team member, or your spouse or you're a partner doctor, acknowledge your owners too, acknowledge your leadership team, because as team members, a lot of times we forget to do that. And, we know as team members how stressful it was and how stressful it is to carry the load of, short staff and all of that. But the doctors are carrying that too. And on top of that, they're carrying the responsibility of keeping this business running and keeping these team members employed and helping their team members be employed so they can provide for their families. So they have a lot on their shoulders too. And so just acknowledge each other as a team that, hey, you made it through, right? And things are going to stabilize. And it might take a little bit longer than we had hoped. Man, we never expected that we were gonna still be at this point. But I'm seeing some light at the end of the tunnel, so that's really good. The next thing is calibrate. And one of the ways that we really help teams get calibrated is to help them develop a standard of care, a common standard of care. And this is just a starter document. Again, I'll give you another QR code for this one in just a second. But this is a starter document that you can really use as a conversation piece in a team meeting, in a hygiene team meeting, to say, you know what, we had some systems in place, but it seems like things have kind of fallen apart. Let's get back together and really agree on what are our diagnostic standards? When do we do what? How often do we update the health history? How are we doing that? Are we taking blood pressure? What is our threshold that we're moving patients from recare into active periodontal therapy? And just really use this as a piece to start some of those conversations and get recalibrated. And then that really helps you rebuild some of those processes that have fallen out. So, reserving that time in the beginning of the hygiene appointment for diagnostics, for, that strong handoff to the doctor, right? That's a process too, right? What do we have prepared and ready when the doctor comes in, and how can we make that really efficient? And from there, then you can set some goals going forward. But this is what we're really helping a lot of teams work on, is this refocus. This is another QR code, and you can also take a picture of this if you want to, just the URL to grab that standard of care document as well. You could download that and use it any way that you like. Okay, so let's talk about this 60% of doctor treatment should come out of hygiene, right? Should be enrolled through hygiene. So, I graduated a long time ago from hygiene school, but I think for the most part, we're still taught that, we're not supposed to diagnose. And while I completely agree that the doctor makes the final diagnosis, it is well within our scope of care and education and licensing for us to observe, right, what is happening in the patient's mouth and how that is related to their overall health, and begin to educate the patient to what some of those problems may be. And then the doctor comes in and makes that final diagnosis. Now, in order to overcome this I'm not supposed to diagnose syndrome, because sometimes hygienists have this, right? They, maybe doctors are asking them to be more involved in the restorative diagnostic process. Maybe they're asking them to be more involved in, representing treatment that is on the treatment plan. And here's the thing, if it's on the treatment plan and it's noted in the clinical notes, then it's already been diagnosed, right? So we're free to go. That has already been done. That's the beauty of comprehensive treatment planning, doctors, is when you create that treatment plan, then your team can work from that and can really help you guide the patient through that treatment plan. But if you don't have that, or things come up with patients, right, that aren't on the plan, we want to overcome this I'm not supposed to diagnose with instead saying, okay, so what can we do, right? If we don't make the final diagnosis, what can we do? We can co-diagnose, we can collaboratively diagnose, and we can pre-educate the patient to what's happening. So what I have found over the years is that there are three real, I'm going to say, leadership steps or leadership principles that doctors can do that can really elevate the level of co-diagnosis in the hygiene department. The first one is permission. So it is important, even if you've been working with your hygienist for a while, if you've never had this conversation, it's really important to explicitly give the hygienist permission to think like a dentist, right? To think like you, and to have these conversations with the patient, and to really be that collaborative partner in the diagnosis, right? So it may be something like, you know what, hygiene team, I have a lot of confidence in you. We're going to spend some time really digging into our doctor treatment philosophy so that you have a deep knowledge of that and can really support the patient and support us in, teeing up treatment and pre-educating the patients. And so I give you permission to, think like a dentist. When you're looking at this patient's conditions, when you're looking at the x-rays, what do you think we would see? And I'm also giving you permission to have those conversations with the patient, and then give them an idea of how far down that diagnostic path you want them to go. And I'll use an illustration of that in just a minute. The next step is really that knowledge, right? Sharing your knowledge, your treatment philosophy. Why do you recommend a crown versus an MOD, filling on a premolar, right? What has your experience told you? And if you've got images of that split premolar, right? We've all seen those in our practices. Then, show that when you're having this conversation. What is it that you look for that gives you the indicator of, I'm going to recommend full coverage here versus a filling? What do you look for when you feel like there are fillings that have been there for a while, but they're still stable and they're fine, versus when it's time to replace those? When do you recommend a crown and a root canal and crown lengthening versus when do you recommend removing the tooth and doing an implant? So there are just a lot of pieces of your treatment philosophy as doctors that comes naturally. It's second nature to you, but your team doesn't know it as well as you do. And you may have a hygienist or two in your practice that are just always spot on, but even those typically can continue to evolve. But you may have a lot of the rest of the team, even your assistants, that aren't as confident, and that this conversation really go a long way. The other thing that I always recommend is that the business team is also included in this, because they've got to have a really deep knowledge of your treatment philosophy and believe in it in order to get patients to say yes to treatment. All right, next step is accountability. So if you've given them the permission and you've shared with them your philosophy, and also you've developed a handoff system, right? Here's how we want to hear this. We want to have those x-rays up on the patient monitor. Those photos on the patient monitor when doctor walks in. And we want to have the x-rays maybe on the other monitor, or, however it works in your practice. You want to make sure that that's happening. And if it's not happening, then you've got to find out why, right? So instead of just, getting frustrated and not saying anything, or picking up the intraoral camera yourself and taking pictures, or what, because that ends up, extending that doctor exam time. Communicate about that. Say, look, this is really important. And do you have everything from a technical standpoint you need here to make this happen? And if your agreement is that you're going to take one intraoral photo at least every time we're recommending treatment, does the hygienist have what they need at their disposal to do it? And here's the thing, that doesn't mean one intraoral camera for 4 ops, right? There are intraoral cameras that are very affordable now. Have an intraoral camera in every op. Make sure everybody knows how to use it. Make sure it's easy to use ergonomically, right? It doesn't require like one person pushing the button and the other one holding the camera. But once you got all that squared away, if those photos aren't happening, then we have to hold each other accountable. And I'll tell you, the way that it worked for me is I knew that's what my doctor needed. And if he came in and saw I didn't have a photo, he'd say, I'll be back. Go ahead and grab that photo. I'll be back, which meant he was going to go sit back down with that patient again. So, that happened to me a few times. And then I was pretty sure I would get that photo. So just, making sure the expectations are clear and everybody's on board, and then holding each other accountable. So this is just an illustration that I like to use of, the diagnostic path. So if the base of this path represents when the patient enters the hygiene op, and this door is the patient saying yes to treatment and entering the doctor's op, Like, how far do you want the hygienist to take the patient down this path, right? Some doctors say, I want the hygienist to establish that there is a problem, take a picture, show the patient what they see, and then maybe share with the patient, hey, in cases like this, what doctor typically recommends is this or this, and she'll come in and she'll make the final decision on this, but that patient is teed up and ready to go. And by the time the doctor comes in to do the exam, that patient is right here, at the front of the door. All the doctor has to do is open the door, nod their head, and the patient will say yes to treatment, right? Some doctors say, you know what, I would like for the hygienist to bring the patients right about here where they know there's a problem, but I'm going to come down the steps a bit and meet them here, and then I'm going to explain the solution. And that's going to take a little bit longer in that doctor exam, but that's okay. If that's your philosophy and what you're more comfortable with, then that's totally fine. You've just got to communicate with your team what your expectations are. And so that knowledge is really shared in this case review meeting where you're bringing charts to the table. Again, this is great for the entire team to do together, right? You're bringing all the documentation and really reviewing what you see. And it's really kind of cool if you can really express your treatment philosophy on specific things that you see commonly. And then, maybe even have the team create a treatment plan before they see your treatment plan, and then see how close it matches what you recommended, and then that gives you a starting point from, where you're going to continue to do some learning. But we recommend all of our clients do this. We recommend all of our clients do this on a regular basis. Even if you do this once a month, spend 20 or 30 minutes on this. It's so valuable to really getting your team on the same page and building that belief in your treatment philosophy. And so what we say too is start simple, right? Don't start with a really complex case. Start with something really simple that your team's going to have some wins with. The other thing that's really great to do, I wish I had a photo in here and I didn't put one of these in here, is take prep photos. So when you remove these old crusty amalgams, take a picture of that. Once you clean out all the decay, take a picture of that. Once you've prepped it for a crown, take a picture of that, right? So that your team sees all these different stages, because there are things that you're going to see in those stages that they were not aware of, whether it is a crack across the floor of the prep, right? Whether it is what it looks like under these old amalgams, because doctors and assistants see this all day long. The rest of the team never sees it. And it is a very powerful tool to build believability and confidence in the treatment philosophy. So any thoughts or questions on that, just from the co-diagnosis standpoint?
No, but again, what you make the point of, Rachel, is how important it is, because you've been doing this for a long time. Patients in the chair, doctor diagnoses, doctor leaves, patient looks at the hygienist and says, do I really need 27 crowns? Right? And if that hygienist gives the wrong answer, or that assistant gives the wrong answer, we're done, right?
Right.
About that a little bit.
Right. We're done.
Yeah.
Yeah. So very powerful to be on the same page and to have that colleague in care, right? To be collaborating on that. All right. So now we're going to wrap up talking about this 3-to-1 profitability rate. So I'd love for you to chime in on this and share your thoughts of what you're seeing, Art, because you have way more experience in this, the business side of this even than I do. But this has been an industry standard for a long time, this 3-to-1 profitability point. And basically what this means is that for the hygiene department to be driving profit to the practice, they should be producing 3 times their compensation. And so, a third of their production is going to hygiene compensation. A third of it is going to hygiene overhead, which is supplies, which is the equipment lease on the equipment that's in the hygiene op, things like that. And then the remaining third should be profit that's going into the practice. Now, a couple things to note is that this number should be based on net production, right? Because if it's based on gross production and there's any difference between gross and net, then you're not looking at real dollars, right? So you have to look at,
PPOs.
right, you have to look at collectible production. Okay.
Correct. Yes.
The other piece of this, and I'm sure I've asked you this question, but I've asked several dental CPAs, but if you have a different opinion, please chime in, is sometimes we get the question of, do the payroll taxes count in that salary and benefits and overhead? And the question is that I've got, or the advice that I've gotten is no, that actually is part of that hygiene overhead. So
I would agree with that, Rachel. I don't think that should be part. I think the salary and the benefits should be the 3 to 1.
yes.
I see many practices where we have a hygienist that's been there for a long time, or is a little more aggressive with the doctor, getting 50, 55, 60% of production. And I say, doctor, you can't do this.
Yeah.
Well, she's been here forever and I can't change it, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So here's what we have found is we have seen that in California more than we've seen it in any other state.
Yes.
And it typically is hygienists that have been there for 20 more years. And so at some point there was probably a, hygiene shortage like there is right now. And this compensation model, was put into play. And so that's a good lesson because things cycle through. And what happens then is when often that the practice transitions to a new doctor and the doctor inherits that, then, they typically are the ones that are going to make a change. One of your ADCPA colleagues referred a client to us in Georgia a couple years ago, and that's exactly what happened. And that's very unusual to see in the South, I will say, but the hygienists were being paid 50%, and they were being paid 50% of the doctor exams too.
Oh,
yeah. So
I'm going to cry again. Tears
I know.
come out of my eyes right now.
So this brave doctor said, look, this is just not sustainable. And, we asked him, we said, look, are you willing to do this, to make this change, even if it means your hygienists are going to leave? And he said, yes. Now, what we knew is there's no way they could go anywhere else and get that kind of a deal, right? So we knew that, but we still wanted to make this, we wanted to make it fair for the hygienists as well. Now, the beautiful thing about it was, this doctor had a very low perio, it was another prosthodontist actually that had 2 hygienists. And the doctor had a very low perio percentage and really wanted to address that piece as well. So what we were able to do is we were able to gradually tier down that commission rate. The first thing we did is we removed the doctor exams, and that production went to the doctor. And then the next thing we did was gradually kind of tier that down more towards the 30% range. But at the same time, we gave them the tools they needed to elevate the care that they were providing. And so honestly, within several months, they ended up getting to making about what they were making before, and the practice was profitable. And they stayed.
No problem.
Yeah. Yeah. So they stayed. And so that is really a nice, it's really a nice way to couple those two things, is give them the tools to get the production up while you are bringing the commission rate back into line. So, so let's say if the hygienist if their salary and benefits are, I'm just going to make up an even number, $100,000 a year, then their production goal is $300,000 a year. Now, here's how this is being challenged now, and it's obvious, you all are feeling this, right? Is you're getting crunched in the middle of, a higher demand for wages from hygienists. So now all of a sudden that hygienist is demanding, $150,000 per year. And then at the same time, you're getting less and less reimbursement when you're in network with these plans. Yes. And so, I really feel like this is being challenged. And is it still, our ideal? Absolutely. Absolutely it is, because you need to, this needs to be a contributing part of your practice. But I will say a couple things to consider is, what if you got to 2.8 to 1, or what if you got to 2.5 to 1, but you have a hygienist that is just on fire recommending high level treatment for the doctors.
Yeah, I mean, it's a facts and circumstances thing, and you're absolutely right. And if you're looking at getting 50 or 60% of your UCR for an 1110 or a perio maintenance, you've got to have some serious conversations with yourself and your team about, I might as well write a check to the patient every time they come in. What's the
Right.
point?
That's
And
right.
and so you're absolutely right, Rachel. It is being challenged, and the question is, do we believe that reimbursements from insurance companies are going to go up or down in the future? We both know the answer to that question, right?
We do.
I
So
mean,
So what do we do? I mean, we're telling all of our clients that are heavily, in network, please, like, speak with your dental CPA, speak with your, expert advisor on analyzing your plans, and look at what are those lowest reimbursing plans, and can you drop that plan? And most of the time, the answer is yes. And most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, it has less of an impact. It has the positive impact outweighs the negative impact. Okay. And there are certainly ways of doing this that are better than others, but you have to look at that. The other thing we have to look at is, are there additional services that the hygienist can provide, right? Besides just pro fees, because if that's all you're doing, you're never going to come out ahead. And like you said, doctors will say, well, we need another hygienist. And I'm like, well, I don't understand why you would do that when you're actually in the negative here.
yes.
So unless you can expand the services, unless you can reduce your dependency on these PPOs, and also unless you can look at ways that you can get benefits from the patient's medical insurance or other ways to cover some of these, procedures that will be paid at a higher level, then yeah, it's going
The
to
math just
be in the crunch. The
doesn't.
math doesn't work. Right.
And what you have to do. I had a doctor who had an average reimbursement percentage of 40%. And she says, what do I do? I'm putting money into the practice every single month. I said, you have two choices. You could either shut the doors or go out of network. And she says, that makes sense. I don't need, I can tell my patients that I can't provide the high level of care that they need with what they're reimbursing me. And the patients, she says, we kept 90% of the patients. It's all how you talk. This is another webinar, Rachel, which we're not doing tonight.
Totally.
Yeah, I agree with you, but get me on my soapbox about reducing your dependency. I was on a panel with some very, very high level people, including the founder of Dental Intel last week, and we were talking about, how do you do this? How do you talk to the patients? How do you get it? You take the worst plan and you get rid of it, and you see how that goes, and you try and you experiment, just like with what you do with that. So
yeah, and so I have to give some credit to a couple of my colleagues, because this came up at ADOM. I was on a panel at ADOM with Lois Banta and
love Lois.
And Tia Hunter and Judy K. Mazoff and
Judy?
Yep, and I'm sorry, there was one other person on the panel, and I'm blanking. Maybe it was just the four of us, but we were talking about. It was just an open Q&A at ADOM, like, what didn't you learn at ADOM that you just still have a burning question? And one of the questions was about, well, how do we drop these plans? And Lois had just some brilliant language around, beginning the conversations ahead of time, that you are changing your relationship with this benefit plan. So the language is not, we're dropping it, right? Because that means we're dropping you, is how the patient perceives it, is, we still will, file your insurance for you. We're just changing our relationship. We're changing the way that we work with this particular plan. And I just thought that was brilliant. So I have to give her credit for that. It's very smart.
And there are also ways, if you do choose to stay in network with plans, and we're getting a little off the hygiene subject, but it's all relevant. Is there are companies, the last webinar that we did was last month was with Clint Johnson of Profitable PPOs, where, maybe you're with plan A and you're getting 74% on this particular procedure. But then if you join the train of plan B, you see the same patients and you're getting 79%. So if you choose to stay with PPOs, but it is very difficult. What you don't want to do, doctors, is walk in tomorrow morning and just go out and network with every PPO you're in. That's professional suicide. We would never, ever recommend that.
Yes. So, yes. It has to be very thoughtfully done. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it has to be very thoughtfully done. But that's a question that I'm asking almost all of them right now. So I just thought, just to kind of wrap up, this is something that came out of a Harvard Business Review. Financial targets don't motivate employees. I mean, I think we see that sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't, right? And sometimes you put financial incentives in place and then they become normalized, right? So they're expected. And I would say, I think I would be wary to say they don't ever motivate employees. But what I would say is, I think it's also important to focus on, important to focus on, the other ways that team members are motivated. They want to contribute to something, right? They want to know that their work really matters and that they are, they have a belief in your organizational purpose. So why do you exist? What is their role, right, in your mission as a practice? And, that they feel that there is that intrinsic value of their work. That's the thing that we really hang our hat on with getting hygienists to shift their belief, is like, look, you have an opportunity to make an impact on this patient's overall health. And that is a huge value there's a huge amount of value in your work in that. And then, what is that impact on patients? And one of the things we ask our teams to do when they do their monthly team meetings or weekly team meetings even is, whose life did we change this week? Whose life did we change this month? There are patients that walk out of your practice every day or at a minimum every week whose life is significantly better because of the work that you provided. Yes. And yet it becomes such an everyday thing for the team and for you that we forget to celebrate that and we forget to mention that. So I think these things really also tie team members to your practice. Right now, a lot of it is, staff are going to the highest bidder, and that's going to normalize. And, things are going to come back around, and, we're going to see this change. Things always cycle through, like the 50%, commission that happened years ago. At some point, some owner of that practice is going to reset that. And, but these are things that really tie team members to the practice and really, make longtime employees. So, yeah.
I have one more question for you. And I'm sure that there are some folks on this call that are thinking the same thing. I have a hygienist and it's just not working. It's just, they keep doing the same. What are the warning signs that I have to make a change? I'm sure I'm not the first person that's asked you this.
Mm-hmm. I would say the warning signs that you need to make a change are if you are trying to put forth some initiatives in the practice that are a triple win, that are in the benefit of the patient, the provider, and the practice, and you're being met with continual resistance, and the team member is just not open to considering a different way of doing things. I was on I spoke at Speaking Consulting Network over the summer with a woman who works with business team members, works with business owners on really putting in this operating system. It's called EOS, right into the dental practice. And she said, it's just fascinating how In the dental industry, employees can just blatantly defy their employer's requests and they keep their job. And we've all seen it, right? I've worked in dental practices over the years, and there are people that just say, well, I'm not doing that. And yet they have their job. And it really is kind of shocking and surprising, but at the same time, anytime you're putting anything forward or you're trying to make improvements in the practice, it is important for your team members to have some input, right? Like mandated change usually doesn't go over well. You're going to have to make some executive decisions, but allow the team to have some input on that. But I would say, okay, back to the warning signs of a hygienist that needs to go. I mean, any team member that is toxic as far as, gossiping and creating drama within the practice, any just clear signs of defiance or talking badly about other team members to patients, or just very, very clear things like that,
or disrespect the patients.
it's disrespecting the patients, chronic tardiness that's affecting the whole team, or absence, things like that. I mean, I think most of them are pretty obvious. I think the ones that are a little bit more covert are those that are really just toxic team members that are causing a lot of drama and dissent within the team. Because a lot of times if those employees get special treatment and they're not called out on that, you'll lose good employees because of that bad employee.
And you'll lose respect from your team. And that's you can't.
Yes, that is exactly right. That is exactly right.
Go ahead.
So I'm going to wrap up and then we can take some more questions.
Yeah.
But wanted to give everybody an opportunity to get the book. So you can get the book at rohbook.com. And then this is a promo code that you can use to get the book at our cost for $9.95. And you'll just see the promo code or coupon code section there. And it's just all capitals. EB21 is a promo code there. And here's our contact information. You're welcome to contact me at the email address that Art provided as well, Rachel@Inspired Hygiene, or clients at. And, we'd be happy to just chat with you, no strings attached, but just have a call, with one of our team members to just see if we, may be able to help you get to the next place or achieve your goals with the hygiene department.
Rachel, tell maybe just a little bit about maybe a 35,000-foot view of your program and what you do for doctors.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. So if it's okay with you, I'll just stop sharing so we can just be
full. In fact, Maisha, if you're there, can you put up the slide with both my information and Rachel's? I don't know if she's there, but that's okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, so we provide everything from a detailed hygiene analysis, which we call our hygiene growth roadmap, to some online programs that can help practices that feel really good about their ability to kind of create a do-it-yourself Perio program, but they just need some guidance. They need some kind of parameters around that, all the way to, having a coach in your practice, really customizing a coaching program to address your needs, whether that be refining an existing Perio program, establishing that program in your practice, and it can include lasers, it can include other adjuncts, helping the clinical team really support the doctor with that strong co-diagnosis and helping facilitate some of those treatment philosophy conversations, to also looking at the business piece of the hygiene department and, how can we help you create a more effective schedule and, really be on the same page, and the whole team having the same verbal skills and just completely elevating the hygiene department. We even have training that involves, how to incorporate digital scanning and some of the new technology into the practice as well, and into hygiene. So we have a lot to offer, and we've been really fortunate to serve a lot of clients across the country.
So one of the great things about having been in the dental CPA business myself for 37 years is I've got a lot of friends all over the country, and this lady is golden, folks.
Thank you.
I've known Rachel. It's obvious she is the best of the best, and that's why we bring her onto our webinars here in Southern California. So you know, just have a conversation with her. She's worked with many of our clients. The changes that she and her team have been able to make are amazing. If you need some help on the CPA side, give us a call at Ide Bailey. Rachel, I think we'll just let you go. You're going to turn into a pumpkin. It's really like but I just want to remind everybody that December 13th, if you are interested in our webinar series, we don't have the landing page out yet. The first one is December 13th on year-end tax planning and the new tax laws. AWIEDERMAN at idebailey.com. Let's see. And then there's one more question we'll get to before we go that just popped up.
Right.
And then again, so if we can do anything for you or Rachel can do anything for you, give us a call. And we'll like I say, we'll see you all on the 14th. I have one more question that came up. How do you get all this done in a 1-hour hygiene appointment?
Yes, that's a great question. So we have a concept that we teach called 20-20-20. And so it really helps divide that hygiene appointment into 3 parts. And so I would say that, I still go in and I don't do hygiene every week, but I still fill in at my home dental practice every once in a while. And it is a lot to get done in an hour. And so the key, I believe, is making sure that we're reserving that first 20 minutes for all of our diagnostic information gathering, right? So we're doing our intro photos, our perio charting, and then we have a clear perio program in place so that we can identify when patients need to move from a prophy into periotherapy. Because if we don't have that in place, a lot of times that scaling portion, which is that next 20 minutes, expands. And so then we run out of time. So if we are spending a lot more than 20 to 25 minutes on the scaling and polishing piece of that appointment, that patient probably needs something other than a prophy. So if we can honor that and stay within that boundary, then we have time to do our perio charting. We have time to do our radiographs. We have time to educate the patient. Here's the thing too, if we start those conversations at the beginning of the appointment before we start scaling, then we have the remainder of the time to keep talking about it, right? It's because we can keep educating the patient to the value of a crown while we're scaling. So it's just really carefully looking at the workflow in that, and also triaging, right? Like we can't address everything that the patient needs at every single appointment. If the patient has a need for a sleep assessment and they need implants and they, have periodontal disease, like we've got to figure out how do we triage today? What is the thing that needs to be addressed today? Because truly the patient will get overwhelmed, and we will too if we try to do it all in one appointment.
All right. You are golden, absolutely golden. I love bantering back and forth with you. Thank you for taking late evening. We'll give you back to your family. And folks, we'll see you on December the 13th. Please tell all your friends about this if you want. I thought I put in the chat, A. Wiederman, WIEDERMAN at idebailey, EIDEBAILLY.com. Rachel Wall from Inspired Hygiene, thank you so much for your valuable time and your information. And folks, let's see, there's one more question that popped up. Oh, there was a thank you. This was really great. Well, thank you. Thank you for attending, everybody. And have a wonderful evening, and have a wonderful Thanksgiving. We'll see you on December 13th. And Rachel, thank you so much.
Thank you. Always a pleasure. Take care.
Good night, everybody.